Hi, Rena.
Hi. Hi,
Welcome to
everyone.
Poetry Club. Hello.
Thank you.
Thank
How's
you.
it going today?
Great, but much better now that you're here. We are so grateful that you're fitting us into your hideously busy schedule.
Thank you. I'm happy to be here too. But it's lovely to meet you all, and I'm looking forward to hearing your questions. Yeah.
Okay. I'm going to start with two questions. And the questions, I keep saying this, but I'll say it again. The questions are kind of guides for, I hope, what will be a managed conversation. And I hope it feels more that way than a formal interview. First of all, this is not a question, but one of the things I'm happy about your appointment is that every picture of you, you're smiling. And I'm glad people see that poets smile and that they're not just these dour people who, even become more so when they step in front of a camera. One of the things that came to me as I was looking over the questions is that all of us have pretty much a close affiliation with education. And you have suggested that you discovered that you're a poet, but Western. What would you say about the impact of the educational setting on your poetry, and especially as you continue to teach? And that's one question. Then the other question, which may fold into this, just to start, is I've asked you a question about your composition process. What do you tell young and struggling poets about how the composition process works for you?
Yeah, so that's something that I was asked recently by a young poet this question, a very similar question, and my response was that it's really kind of just about sitting down and writing and seeing what's there. I had an interview with Shannon a few years ago for a podcast she had, and I'm reminded of something that my dad says. He's a fisherman, and he says, if I caught him all the time, I wouldn't be a fisherman, I'd be a catcherman. And I feel like that's true for poets too. You don't always get a poem every time you sit down, but if you get out there and set your net, you're going to catch something, and then the more you do it, the more skilled that you get at knowing where to set your net and where there are fish under the surface. So it's really just kind of about doing it often and finding your own way, because there's really no rules in poetry, and then just kind of leaning into that uncertainty. I like the Keats discussion about negative capability, and he talks about letting go of that irritable grasping towards fact and reason. I love that because the discoveries are made in uncertainties, and you make room for new things and exciting epiphanies and revelations in your writing when you just kind of you just surrender and see what's up there. It's surprising to yourself sometimes, to myself, to me. It's really surprising what shakes out. So that's what I will tell young people as far as the process of writing. And then also don't be judgmental about what you write, because William Burroughs, he quotes, Stevenson, he says something about, in his book, The Adding Machine, he talks about some other author says, if you write something and you really love it, just throw it away. Because it's terrible. And then Burroughs says, if you write something and you really, really love it and you feel like you need to share it immediately, just put it in a drawer. And then the next day you'll go back and you'll realize that you need to throw it away in someone else's trash can so that they can have the blame if anyone ever finds it. which I thought was really funny. I don't recommend that, but I just think that we are not the best judges of our work. So sometimes when we're hard on ourselves, it's not warranted. Sometimes if we think something is not good and we put it away, the opposite can happen. We can find it years later and say, oh, wow, look at this. It's kind of like a little surprise in your journal. So, don't be hard on yourself and don't be too judgmental about your work, and just kind of let time tell and see what happens. Because, I think that that's something that when I was younger, I would do a lot of, was just say, oh, this is nothing. This is nothing. I mean, it's part of the growth process too. Ira Glass, he gave a talk once and he said that if you feel like your work is not good, it's because you have good taste and your skill hasn't caught up to your taste. And if you have good taste, your skill will catch up to your taste. Wow. And so I liked that a lot too. That when you are critical, when you just can't help yourself, when you're critical about your own work, also know that that's partially because you know what you want from your work and you're just not hitting it the way that you need to. But that's a good sign. If you know what you want, that's a really good sign that you're able to read yourself clearly. So all of that for process, for younger writers.
Can I follow up? Then once you have a poem that you're prepared, you think is ready for publication, but is that then a challenging decision to make in light of what you've said?
Yeah, I didn't like, so Patriarchy Blues, I sat on those poems for like 10 years. Let me see. Like 7 years. Yeah, I sat on those poems for 7 years. And then didn't end up sending them out necessarily. I made little chapbooks, hand-bound chapbooks that I sewed and used silk screens that I'd made. And just the silk screens were laying around on nice paper, and I thought I really should do something with these. So I used those as my covers, and was kind of reading them at salons and readings and things, because people would say, where can I find your work? And I'd say, nowhere, you can't. And so I thought, well, I should have something for people who are interested after a reading, that, they can get by donation or whatever. And so I made those little books, and that's how Patriarchy Blues came into being. I was at a salon, a literary salon, and the publisher from Moonpath Press said, do you have more of these poems? She bought one of my little chapbooks. I said, oh yeah, there's lots of them. And she said, well, could you put them together and send me a manuscript? And I said, yeah. So I did, and she's like, this is great, let's do this. And the editing process was very minimal. It was just kind of like a rearranging of a couple of the order of poems, and then some copy editing. So that kind of came into being like really suddenly once that process was started, and kind of unexpected, in a roundabout unexpected way. But I had a really hard time sending out my work. I wouldn't do it for a long time. So that's another thing I should say to young writers, is don't be scared to send your works, because you just never know, you just never know.
Okay, thank you. Rena the poet and Rena the academician. Are these somewhat discrete elements in your professional person, or do you see these as both expressions of a kind of unified spirit?
Yeah, I've had a really hard time in sort of academic roles. I mean, not a hard time. It just isn't natural for me. I mean, like, I am a good student, but I think I have real challenges as a teacher. I had one student, he was so sweet, and I know who it was. You know, those reviews, reviews are supposed to be anonymous, but I knew everybody's handwriting because they would I'd let them draft on just written, you know, from their hand. And so he said, Rena will be a very good teacher when she learns how to use her authority. Like, oh, that's so sweet, because I don't like to exercise that in a classroom. I've always learned through discussion, and I feel that so much of Western education looks at finding the right answer, and it excludes a lot of possibilities, you know, kind of driving towards one set way of doing things. And I think that it actually has shaped our culture in a way that, you know, it's set us up for a lot of these like adversarial positions around like people thinking that they have the right answer, rather than like being willing to just be in discussion and see different points of view. And, you know, like, because that's hard to grade. You can't set an A, B, C, D fail grade on discussion, really. And so I don't think that it's necessarily used in academia to the degree that it could be. So I guess I've had a really hard time as an academic, as like, you know, a professor.
Have you had occasion? Have you had occasion to present your work in your class, or do you shy away from that?
I would sometimes, on occasion, if students asked me to share something, I would share, like, you know, around the midterm or the final, when we were having readings or presenting, I would share. But mostly, I would just kind of want to have it be about their work. Yeah, and also when I was teaching, I still didn't really feel, I still wasn't sharing my work as much at that time.
Does anyone else at this point have a comment or a question you'd like to ask?
Rena, I have a question for you. I have not looked into the actual mechanics of applying to be the Poet Laureate. I saw the results, the passing of the Laurel video. Oh my gosh, that was so beautiful. So I know what happens when you get it. What was the process like to get it? I think, Ron, you had a question as well about that in your question.
My question was kind of focused on at what point do you have the chutzpah to say to folks, my work is good enough, and I want you to think about it while you're making your selection?
Yeah, so I don't know. So the process of the application, that was really cool. I really loved that. I wouldn't have had the chutzpah except that John Green nominated me. He didn't like go through the official nomination process. You know, he's just Bellingham poet, and on Facebook he said, I nominate Rena Priest, and I was like, okay. Also, I had a lot of encouragement from Kathleen Flanagan, who was the curator of the cohort that I was a part of for the Jack Straw Writers series, and that I participated in 2019. And she was a former Poet Laureate, and I got to sort of work closely with her, and also with Elizabeth Austin, another Poet Laureate, through the Jack Straw Writers program. And they both said, you should try for this. You know, I think you would like this. You'd be good. And so that was encouraging. That was a nice little, like, well, maybe I could do this. That was something that got me thinking about it in that direction. And then my friend Dawn also was like, you should really try for this. She sent me an email. It was really nice. She's like, you should go for this. And that was in 2020. And I didn't, and I let the deadline pass me by because I didn't have a project in mind. And then I kicked myself afterwards because all these nice people were telling me to try for this. But I was dealing with some fatigue around, I had just closed out a National Geographic grant and done the corresponding project, and also did the Jack Straw closing out the Jack Straw Writer year, and then also finishing up with the year of having my book selected by Floating Bridge Press as the finalist. So there were like a lot of readings and a lot of events and activities that I was juggling while working full time. And I thought, and also my daughter was graduating. So I was like, I just kind of want to have a year where I don't do all this stuff. And then, but when the deadline did go by, I did have that feeling of regret, like, oh, maybe I should have tried for that. And then they had it again. And I was like, okay, well, I guess I'll try for it. Yeah, the encouragement of people in the writing community, I guess, is where I had the chutzpah, not so much about my own work, but around like being able to visualize myself in this role by what other people saw. That really helped. And then the process was really cool. I really enjoyed applying for the position because it was a long application. It was quite a long application, and it asked really good questions that offered opportunities for deep reflection on what poetry has meant to me throughout my life, and what I think it means to be a part of like the poetry community, and what it has to offer people who are not necessarily audiences of poetry, like not your typical audience. So it was really nice.
Was the interview process, would you say, formidable?
It was really good. There was like a little bit of an icebreaker because the like link said, don't try to log on before your interview. And I think it was because other people would be interviewing during that time before. And so I like waited until right before my interview to log on at the exact set time. And then it turned out that there was like all of this stuff that had to be done to download Microsoft Teams. I thought I had it because I never had to do any of that when I used it at my office. So I thought it was all just going to be click, click, click. And no, there was a big ordeal about trying to get in, and they couldn't see me, and I was talking and they could kind of hear me, and then I'd get bumped off. And so it was like kind of comical. And so by the time I did finally get in there, I realized, okay, these are all really nice people and it's going to be okay. They've seen me through like the technical difficulties, and we're going to just coast here. And so that was nice to have that little bit of an icebreaker, even though it was could have potentially have been a recipe for disaster. But once I got in there, it was nice to feel like I was talking to other poets about poetry. All of their questions showed that they knew like what this whole thing was about, and like, that we were like on the same page. It was really good. I appreciated it a lot.
Okay. I'm really interested in your choice, Sarah Lawrence, for a graduate degree. I'm really interested in your whole take on New York City. And I of course, read Patriarchy Blues, and I've read a lot of the commentary and the biographical information about how that book evolved. So, one, how long did you live in New York City? How did you choose Sarah Lawrence as the place you wanted to get a master's degree? And what other observations would you add? How glad were you to get back to the Pacific Northwest?
Yeah, so I was looking at some different schools. I was looking at St. Mary's down in California, and I was looking at Bennington, and Goddard has that low residency program where you can go to Whidbey Island for, I think it's like 7 weeks out of the year or something like that. So I was looking at Goddard, and then also Naropa. I was kind of really excited about Naropa, the Jack Kerouac School of Disembodied Poetics.
Oh.
And so I went to visit Jim and Anita, and my professor Jim Berlino and Anita Boyle, local poets here. And we were just chatting. Oh, and my friend Nancy Pegg was there, and we were just chatting, and they were asking about, you know, what I was up to and everything. And I let them know I'm applying to graduate school, and they asked where I was looking at, and I mentioned all of those schools. And Jim said, well, have you thought about Sarah Lawrence? And I had never heard of Sarah Lawrence, but I have always kind of wanted to live in New York City at that time. It was like kind of exciting to think about, you know, living in a big city. But so I said, no, I've never thought about it. I looked it up, and it looked perfect. I was like, oh my God, that would be amazing. It looked really exciting. And I looked at some of the teachers that were there, and I was like, this is going to be cool. And I didn't actually know that if I would get in. So, you know, it was just kind of like sent the application off and crossed my fingers. And they were the first ones to respond, and they said yes. And I was like, woo! So, you know, I did a little dance in my living room and called everyone I knew. And I think my mom was like, oh no. But, you know, my parents were really happy for me. But I think they were surprised. I don't think that they knew how real this was until that happened. And then living in New York, it was really awesome and amazing in some ways. And in other ways, it was really hard. I remember like my group of friends just constantly like having, you know, these expectations about like entering the workforce or about, you know, just kind of how one ought to be treated in society being thwarted by like the realities of New York City, and you know, the like patriarchal structure and influences there. And so it was, you know, I guess true to its reputation about the city being a hard place, and really getting to live that and see that, but also seeing how rich and alive the place is too. It just kind of is. It's a good place to make art.
Yeah. So I've written a question about narrative, and it's a broad topic for me, and I think for all of us. We have encountered a number of poets who declare that they're storytellers. And I'm often tempted to think that we all are. We all tell a story. And I know that there are novelists and poets who say that every writer tells one story and retells it. I find that true of many of the writers that I've encountered. And I remember as a much younger person and teacher, being told that if I had Native American students in my classes, that I would find that they would write narratively, and I had to find a way to accommodate that if I were going to be fair to them. So can you share some observations about all of that in your work and in your development? To what extent are you a storyteller? To what extent does it really inform your work, narrative, etc.?
Well, so I took a class in undergrad from Kate Trueblood, and it was amazing. Some of you might know her work. She teaches fiction at Western. I think she's the department chair of the English department also. But anyways, she, on our first day of class, or maybe it was attached to the syllabus, gave us this sheet of Ben Okri quotes from The Joys of Storytelling. And Ben Okri, he's British, but anyway, I won't go too. I don't remember a lot of his biographical details, but that form, I've kept it always because it's just so beautiful. The way that he talks about storytelling, and he says, "Homo fabula, we are storytelling beings." I kind of love that. That you just can't separate the word from the story. Even etymologically, every word tells a story, right? Like if you break it down into its parts. In Chlomi-Chaucen, we have this word that I was asking about, and I wrote a little piece that was in the Seattle Met last year, kind of around it, but it tells the story of the survivors of the flood, which is, kind of something that is an important story in our mummy cosmology. But it the word is Elstano, and it's just means the people. And so I can't remember how exactly it came up. I heard it used in a story and then came to assume that it meant in the time that we were all together, kind of from that particular experience where I'd heard it. And it was explained that way. And so I asked my teacher about it, and he broke the etymology down for me. And it's this, Atla, which is we're here, Tal, which is the sea, out to sea, living together in a village. We're here, we're out to sea, we're living together in a village. And it refers to that story about the time when we were all together before we went our separate ways after the flood to become the Mish people. There's a link to it. You can look it up on YouTube, but it's our hereditary chief telling the story of the survivors of the flood, and it kind of elaborates on that. But in English, so many of our words do that too. They break down to tell a little miniature story. So I think you just can't even get away with it. You get away from it, not even on like the level of a single word. So it's just in us. It's part of being a person.
Okay. I was quite taken. We not really had a chance to talk about the poem, but your poem, The Hobo and His Pigeons. And the question that I wrote, it's a Petrarchan sonnet, and very informal one, but also in some ways a very formal one. It adheres very closely to the form. And so my question was, is in its form and themes and tone, is this poem representative of your work, do you think, or is it more of an anomaly? Was it a kind of lark to write a poem like that? I did not see throughout your other poems in that book, I saw 2 lines that rhyme. Otherwise, you don't engage in rhyme.
Well, I like to use internal rhyme. So like where the rhyme, it echoes and cascades throughout the poem, but it's not at the end of the line, but you just hear it. It's like, you might just glide right over it and not even realize, but like when you hear it aloud, there's like a musicality that I try to work into all of my work. But it's just, I don't want it to necessarily be like right, out at the front of the thing. I don't know. I like internal rhymes better, just for some reason. The echoes of like, I guess assonance too, the vowel sounds repeating and like, coming.
So as you revise and edit, you're alert to these opportunities?
Oh yeah. And also while I'm writing too, like if I'm like, what comes next? Usually an echo of the sound that came before. So the writing process, it happens a lot in the writing process too. Just naturally, it's like satisfying to have a word. Oh, well, that goes there, you know, like kind of for sure. That's definitely what goes there. That's really nice. But I do like to write in form. It's a good jumping off place for me. The whole collection, Sublime Subliminal, is written in an invented form by an Arizona poet named Jim Zimmerman. And I love that form. It just opens so many doors for like discovery in language. And it is a lot of fun to work in that. I feel like it helps re-enchant me with the whole poetry writing process. But I also tried to write a heroic crown of sonnet for my Jack Straw project. And they just felt so like forced. I abandoned it a few sonnets in and just kind of thought, okay, let's go another way. And I made an invented form called oblique sonnets. And that's talked about in the anthology that the Jack Straw Writer series put together. And it's just kind of like taking the sonnet structure and using the first 8 lines and repeating those, or not repeating them, but the first 8 lines and looking at something in a particular way, doing it again in a second set of 8 lines, a third set of 8 lines, and a fourth set of 8 lines, with the final stanza being 6 lines that you could just put on the bottom of any of the previous 4 sections and have it be like a complete 14 lines. And okay. So that was kind of fun, a new way of like trying to look at that form and play with it. But you know, there's just so much room for like invention within a certain structure. I enjoy working in a form. I've been writing pantoums lately.
Okay. Shannon asked that we keep some time to open it up to the group, so I'll just ask you one more question, probably be a short one, and then hear what other people's questions are. You teach, have you taught creative writing and especially writing poetry, and would you opt to do that? So sometimes I'll teach workshops. I just finished teaching hosting the quarantine write-in for the Hugo House for the month of June. And that was a lot of fun. I like that informal setting where I'm not having to give anybody a grade or like, you know, crack the whip and be like, where's your midterm or whatever. I don't like that aspect of teaching, the like measurement. I have a really hard time with measuring people so much about what they get out of the process. Hopefully a lot, but it just is really hard to enforce those kinds of sets of rules. Yeah. So I don't know if I will go back to teaching. Also, everything is going online now, and I feel like that's so hard for the reason, you know, it like kind of takes away the reason that I love poetry so much and creative writing is like having it be a way of connecting and building community. And, you know, this is nice. Like we're doing this here online, and I think that's really cool. That it enables these opportunities. But in a classroom setting, when you're together for 12 weeks or 15 weeks, however long, depending on whether you're on the quarter or semester system, I feel like it just doesn't enable the same kind of connection that I like to have in a teaching environment. So, you know, I don't think that I probably will go back to teaching that way. Thank you. Shannon, okay, you want to open it to questions and comments from other people?
So, Rena, I was wondering, in regards to the actual job of laureate, what do you have on the books right now that's already for projects? What's already set? And then what are some that you're really hoping for in regards to actual projects that you're doing? And you're the laureate until when? Till spring of 22 or
2023, spring of
20?
April of 2023. Yeah.
Wow. And so that's a lot of time. And the state, Washington State, is a pretty big state. So, I mean, we're not Montana. So that's my question about your projects, what you have on the books and what you hope to have.
Yeah, so it has been really, really busy. I'm gonna conclude this first quarter as Poet Laureate on July 15th, and I'm gonna try to do that with a blog post saying this is everything I've done so far, because it's been a lot. And kind of maybe talk a little bit about things that I've learned and what it's been like for the first quarter here, doing the job. But as far as things that I've got on the horizon, I'm gonna do the Madrona launch. There's an anthology that I wrote the preface for and have 2 poems included in, and it's really exciting. It was edited by Holly Hughes, and it's going to be out on Empty Bowl Press, and we're launching that on July 14th at the Finn River Cidery. So that's coming up. Let's see what else. I'm going to do a reading. I've got some upcoming readings, but the main thing that I'm really excited about is I met with the STEC community, which is the State Tribal Education Compact group. So like tribal schools throughout Washington State. I was able to get in on their last meeting of the year before they break for the summer and share some of my work and some of my hopes for visiting tribal schools and working, getting out there into tribal communities to share poetry. So that was really cool. I also met with someone, the coordinator of libraries in Washington State, libraries and archives. And I've got a meeting set up for later in the month where I get to talk to all of the tribal archivists and librarians and share about, possibly coming and visiting tribal libraries. So that's exciting. And I was also able to meet with the potential publisher for the salmon anthology that I want to put together. And we talked about when to put out a call for submissions and maybe staggering it and just like reaching out initially where I can, put out a personalized call to poets who I definitely know work in, this subject matter and would like to invite them to submit, and then a broader call to everyone, to poets throughout the state. So yeah, that's kind of in the works. We've started that whole process. And the same person who is coordinating the meeting with the tribal librarians and archivists, she said that she would be willing to put me in touch with people at the parks so that we can get the poetry, the placards in the parks situation rolling. But I'm thinking I might start that in the new year, because it's looking pretty busy from here until the end of the year. I've got some exciting readings coming up, and then some writing projects that I need to like really hunker down and get to. And I think the rest of the year is just going to fly. These 3 months certainly have just like gone by in a blink, and I'm trying to catch my breath still. So
can I ask a follow-up question? And then I'll be quiet.
Yeah.
So what's the percentage of teaching and reading and spreading the word of poetry? Is it 50-50, would you say, or is it what would you say it is?
So I've actually only really taught probably, that's maybe only 10%, strangely. Surprisingly, I would say like 60% is interviews, this kind of thing that we're doing right here. I've talked to so many reporters, it's just crazy, and done so many interviews, like long interviews, written interviews. There's a lot of that. Readings, I'd say probably makes up 30%. And then the other 10%, it's been doing like keynote addresses or graduation addresses, things like that. I did a mentoring session. I did, opening remarks, kinds of things like that. So it's been surprising to me. I thought it would be a lot more like workshops and readings and things like that. So, but I think also it's limited because of Zoom. It's like whatever works best in this format. So,
Well, Shannon had really similar questions to what I was going to ask, because I'm really interested in, that it's been your first 3 months as a poet laureate. As far as, are you able to write or find time for yourself? Is it everything you expected it to be? And just how are you doing with it?
Oh, I've actually, it's been it's a real learning. It's an opportunity to grow. Another interviewer asked me, what is it like living the life of an artist? And I said, I don't feel like I'm living the life of an artist. I feel like I'm living the life of an artist's personal assistant. Oh. There's a lot of emails, a lot of, kind of invoicing, a lot of reporting, a lot of like work that just goes along with like making the wheels turn, a lot of responding and coordinating, and I haven't had too much time for myself to write. In June, I was feeling, so at the end of May, I was feeling overwhelmed, and I said, my husband booked this really great camping trip down the Pacific coast, and we drove to Big Sur in our Volkswagen bus, and we camped and hiked and swam, and it was really beautiful and lovely, and it was everything I needed, because I needed to run away from my email for a week and just be free, and I think that that really helped kind of like bring me back to myself and think about writing again and what it's all for. So I think and the folks at Humanities Washington and the Arts Commission of Washington said, you got to take time for yourself. You're going to have to, do that. And also Todd Marshall has been really encouraging about that too. He's like, find time to run away. I'm going to kind of keep watching out for those opportunities to have like restorative activities coming into my life. But yeah. Thank you.
Well, the follow-up question is, you're really talking to a broader audience now than you have before, I would imagine, and you are getting to see the different corners of Washington State. So are you surprised by anything, or have you learned something that you didn't know before? Or
well, I think I haven't really been out too much into other than on Zoom, which touches everywhere, like everywhere. I did an event, a couple of weeks ago now, but it was kind of surprising because it was a Seattle-based organization that had me come and talk, but there were people from everywhere. There were people from Colorado, there were people from Arizona. So, I think Zoom skews that a little bit. Washingtonians, I was born and raised here, so I kind of know like and I've been all over the state, just kind of in my comings and goings. And, I lived in Spokane for a while when I was younger, and I kind of have a feel for what Washington, I think I got it like everywhere, maybe. But I think that I'll get to feel more of that when I get out and start driving and actually seeing people. It's really strange doing readings on Zoom because you don't know who's there or how they're responding. Like if they turn their camera off, which a lot of these readings I do, they spotlight you. So you can't see anyone. You just see yourself like talking and reading out into the void, and you don't know how people are responding. Where I'm really used to being able to gauge what I want to share and what I want to read next based on like audience reactions, like to the first poem and the second poem, start safe and then see how far you can push the edges. But you can't do that here. So I just have to hope that whatever I'm sharing is going over and, cross my fingers and leap. But, it's been a challenge. It's been different.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
Rena, do you write every day, or how many days do you go without getting itchy about writing?
Oh, I'd say that I could probably go, maybe 3 or 4 days, and I'd be like, it feels funny, not, got to hear your voice.
Okay.
Let's catch Lynn's question. She's been
Yeah.
I was really interested in your comments on grading as a teacher, because it's a kind of feedback, and feedback is really popular in the poetic community. So do you have any wisdom from your cultural background to share with how feedback is helpful and how it's hurtful?
Yeah. Well, I think maybe this is more from being a mother, but it's really, or maybe just like that old saying, if you can't say anything nice, don't say anything at all. Like, you want your comments to be helpful, but also it's not going to be helpful if you hurt someone's feelings. Plus, I don't think that when I read poetry, I never just think, oh my God, this is terrible. I don't ever think that. I just think, okay, mechanically, how could this work better? Or what is it trying to do? Kind of trying to see what I like to hear specific questions too. If people what do you want from this feedback? What are you looking for in this piece? What do you need to know about it? And then also asking what do you think is working and not working? That's really hard for me too, though, the whole feedback thing, because it's such an intuitive process, right? And on the other hand, workshopping, I feel, is more valuable because you get more points of view than just the instructors. And when I did my MFA, I could hear the comments that somebody would make, later on down the road, for years, I'd be drafting and I'd hear so-and-so's voice being that's an on-ramp, you could just get rid of it. Or what are there's a lot of these things that are just kind of helpful tools and tips in writing. I would give people George Orwell's 10 tips on writing and say, those are my comments, follow those. Where are you breaking these rules? Things like that. So, but as far as specific feedback, if there was something that I saw, there's one line in iambic pentameter right here, and then it could easily have a second line following that same meter. You don't have to follow it all the way through, but how lovely that would sound to just kind of tweak this little section right here to make it, add that a little bit of music. Things like that. If I notice it, I would say it, but mostly just kind of skewing towards being actually helpful.
There's a really good book out called No More Feedback. And it's got a lot of really great points in it that I've thought about in poetry. So anyway, thank you.
Yeah. Linda?
I'd like to know, how does a poem begin for you? Do you get an image, a word, a phrase, excited about some theme? Is it different?
It's usually an image or a scrumptious set of sounding words. Like, if I jot it down and think about it later and see it, I'll be like, oh yeah, that's a poem. And then I'll see if I can like build and, snowball out into something. But images too are really good. Sometimes for a little while, I was writing poems based on like scientific phenomena that I thought were just really fascinating. There's a couple of those, I think, in Patriarchy Blues, like Van der Waals force, and then the electron microscope. That was a cool image, like to think about writing a love letter on the head of a pin with using an electron microscope was like, oh, that's a poem. There's a poem there for sure. So just whatever like intrigues me or kind of catches my attention in a given moment, if it can build into something that's cool.
Did you write poetry as a child or have an inclination towards poem making?
I did write poetry as a little kid, but not often. I just really liked the sounds of words. I loved to read poetry my whole life. I loved the sound of poetry and reading it aloud. And also when certain things were said, phrases, combinations of words, hearing different languages, the ways of like cadences and rhymes, even though you don't know what is being said. I used to like to watch movies, foreign movies without the subtitles and just listen and watch the expressions and see how much is like communicated just through, cadences in the human voice. So.
Rena, we spent a lot of time talking a couple of poems, and I know you said you listened in on podcast. Is there anything you would want us to ask you, or you would like to say about Toward a Beautiful Flare of Ruin, perhaps, or any of the other poems we were digesting and discussing?
Yeah, so I liked I liked Ron's analysis of Toward a Beautiful Flare of Ruin. It was the dark night of the soul. Yeah, you got it. So I thought it was an interesting discussion. I think people always ask me who my favorite poets are, and I always kind of struggled with that question. And I'm like, why is that always a really hard question for me? It like seems so simple. But I came to realize that I think the reason that I always have a really hard time answering that, and why my answer always feels like false and contrived, is that a poem means a different thing to you every time you come to it. And a poet, I go to different poetry for different things, or when I'm discovering poetry, I'll always find something in there that I need. So it's almost like whatever I happen to be reading at any given time is my favorite ever. And what I go back to again and again is also my favorite. So it's kind of, and you just read things differently at different times in your life. And even just thinking about while I was drafting the poems, some of the things that I was trying to say and how now they say something else about like my current state of being. So it's kind of interesting. I think that's kind of the beauty of it too. Like in tribal storytelling, I read a quote by Vi Hilbert, and she was talking about how we never tell you after we tell the story what the story means or what to think about it, because it's going to mean something different to everybody. You just got to get to it, like where you're going to get to it, and get something out of it if you can. And I think that those traditional stories, they were healing and meaningful dealing in archetypes and things like that, in the same way that poetry can be meaningful and broad and like encompassing everything, you know, like and it allows for contradictions like that. Whitman, do I contradict myself? Very well, and I contradict myself, or I'm broad, I contain multitudes, things like that, you know. So I don't know if I really have much in terms of being able to elaborate on the meanings of those, but I did like your reading, and I liked your analysis, and I liked your questions a lot. I thought, oh wow, this is a good discussion.
Thank you.
I really enjoyed you guys talking about the poems, and I want to listen to your discussion about other poets too, just to see, you know, because it's something that I really miss too, is this type of discussion. That's something that I did love about academia, that it's you know, I don't get too often anymore, is these rich discussions around poetry. It's nice to hear you guys having these.
I love your answer about favorite book. And I think favorite poet. I think I'm going to adapt that when somebody says, what's your favorite book? Because really, shouldn't your favorite book be the one that you're reading? Because you're absorbed in it. It means a lot to you. So thanks for that.
Yeah.
Well, Rena, we've used the time that we were promised. And I don't know if anyone else has a last minute item they'd like to add, or if you would like to say anything more, but we certainly appreciate the time you spent with us and just enjoyed it.
Yeah, I thought this was really nice. And I just want to thank you for the invitation and for, you know, celebrating poetry in this way that you do. This is awesome. And looking forward to listening to your podcast. So thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Rena, for everything. Thank you so much for being on the show and for everything you're doing out there in the next year and a half, 2 years. But
do come back. It'd be wonderful to hear your reflections on this year. That would be great.
Yeah, I think I'd like that. So anytime, you know, just we'll circle back.
Great.
Anyway, I gotta go, but thank you so much.
Thank you
Bye,
for
everyone.
being here.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Later.
Bye.